Welcome to Smash Writing. And today, I bring you something a little bit special. From a commenter request, this is for Lucas Smith, who wanted me to talk about It Follows. And we'll get to Mandy too next week. But if you want a movie review, if you'd like me to review a movie, feel free to drop it down in the comments section below. Like I said, this is for It Follows. One of the candle holders for one of the horror movies that are in the elevated horror category. A category I'm not too familiar with myself, because I'm not really a big fan of the words elevated horror, just because not all horror movies are stupid slashers. They've already had quite a few of them that make you think. That's a conversation for another day, though. I do like the fact that when he requested this, he didn't tell me if he liked it or not, so I'm not being swayed one way or the other. So I know some people either really love this movie, some people really hate this movie. Let's dive in and see where I fall on the spectrum, shall we? This movie starts us off with a woman. She runs out of her house and she does a full loop in front of her house, ignoring requests for help from her neighbor and her dad. She manages to make it back into her house and she gets her stuff back to her car and she speeds away. She ends up down at the beach and she has one last tearful phone call with her dad before whatever's chasing her arrives and bends her. She is taken out and her leg is bent completely forward at a weird looking angle. Before we meet our main character, Jay, who's swimming in the swimming pool. She declines a movie night with her sister and her friends for a date she has later on that evening. You get some creepy kids perving on her that need to be beaten into shape. But she finishes up in the pool and she goes inside and we meet a little bit of her friends. Paul, who clearly has a crush on her. Her sister, Kelly, I believe her name was, and Yara. But anyway, she gets ready for a date off to the movies with Hugh. And they play this game called the Trade-In game, I believe it's called. The Trade Game, where one person scans a crowd, and then the other person has to try to figure out who will they trade places with if they have a chance. Hugh picks a little kid to trade places with because they have their entire life ahead of them. She picks someone, and he points to a woman in a dress that just isn't there. He panics and rushes them out, claiming to be sick, but not too sick to have a nice little meal after at a diner. And it ends up taking her back home the next day. You see her out with her sister, and they're talking a bit. In fact, a little bit about the neighborhood situation and the fact that her and her boyfriend haven't taken things to the next level yet. And you have a little moment with the sister staring at the neighbor, Greg, who comes into play later on in the movie. But date number 2 is a nice little picnic at the beach. Things get hot and heavy, leads back into the car for a more intimate moment. Afterwards, she's sitting there reminiscing, basking in the glow of things. He knocks her out with a bit of chloroform. I actually really like this scene because it isn't like that instant knockout you see in some movies, but you really show that this is a violent action going on here. This is not quick and knockout. This is long, drawn out, and terrifying, too. And the fact they weren't playing any music, they were just letting the scene hold. Really does deliver a lot. But she wakes up tied to a wheelchair, and he explains what's going on. That he passed off something to her. It was given to him, he's now given it to her. This thing will take the form of a stranger or somebody that she knows, and it will come after her, wanting to eliminate her. And if she is taken out, it'll come back down the line to him. So he really needs her to believe him and stay alive. And the reason he has her tied up to this wheelchair is so that she can see it for herself. Because both of them can see the entity since they're both been marked by it. And this naked woman is just slowly walking toward them. And he gets her out of there, and we cut to seeing the group. Sister Yara, that's just going to mess with my speech impediment. Good Lord. And Paulie's gonna have a bad time. I'm just ruthlessly gonna mock both Paulies. Are talking. They just so happen to talking about this scenario kind of deal, where if you feel the house caving down around you, some believe you should just settle in and wait for the inevitability of it all. That's a little bit on the nose, but whatever. Hugh pulls up and he more or less just tosses her out into the road and tells her one more time, don't let it get you, and peels away with her hardly having enough energy to get out of the road. Cops are called. She goes to spend some time in the hospital and then back the next day. The cops have been trying to find him, but he used a fake name to get the house. In the house, there's clearly nobody been in the house. So they have nowhere to go figure out where he is. And you have a good moment of her just studying herself in the bathroom, in the shower, looking at herself, despondent over what has happened to her. And then next day she goes to school, where she sees an old woman in one of the hospital gowns, heading through the field toward the school, and then following closely behind her in the hall as she's trying to get away from it. She realizes nobody else can see it. She goes to this, there's like an ice cream shop that Paul and I believe her sister work at. None of them really believe her. They just think it's stress from what happens. Paul offers to stay the night, to the objections of both of them. Even though I think her sister made a comment about she doesn't need you humping her leg all night. But after a bit more persisting, they allow him to stay over as long as he sleeps on the couch, and the other friend comes over too. And they're having a bit of a talk, and you find out that he was her first kiss and all of that. And then you hear a window shatter. He goes to see what's happening, and it's like someone broke the window, but I can't see anybody. And he goes to do a walk through the house, and she goes to see herself, and there's a woman standing in the kitchen. And she gets chased off into her bedroom. She locks the door. Paul and her sister convince her to open the door and let them in, and they're trying to calm her down. But while they're doing that, there's another knock. It's the friend trying to get in. But when the door's open that time, this massive, tall guy just comes straight down the hall. And she freaks out and exits the window and gets on a little pedal bike and pedals away. And they find her at the park on a swing set. And neighbor Greg, who's seen all of this, shows up as well. And everyone decides they're going to go find Hugh and try to really get some answers to what's going on. And they go to the house that he claimed to be living at. And it's a good thing Paul was looking at porn, because they were able to find a high school photo from him inside the porn now, which allowed them to track it to the school, which allowed them to get his real name and find out where he lives. He's obviously not too happy to have her there, because like I said, if she eats it, then he's next, and they should not be in the same proximity to one another. And he just tells her one more time, that's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to do this to you. You seem really nice, but I had to get it off of me. You understand. Prick. But they decide they're going to go out to this faraway cabin and decide to hang out for a little bit, because some of this group still ain't buying it. And they're spending a bit more time back at school. You had a little moment between Greg and Jay to show that they might get a little bit closer than you might expect, which pisses off Paulie, but he's keeping quiet on all of that. They go up to this beach house, and they're having a few days, a good time, getting their minds clear. I think it's the day before they're set to leave, though. The entity shows up. And this time, Greg's not there. He is taking a leak, and Yarla is watching from the ocean, the water, but she can still see what's going on as her hair is pulled up by the entity. And to her sister, it's invisible. There's no one there, but her hair is standing straight up as it's being pulled. And Paul tries to help and whacks at the air with his chair, hitting the entity. He mule kicks him into oblivion. And she runs off, and the three of them and the friend from the water make it to this boathouse. And Greg is running up to it, but she gets the gun out that they gave her when they got to the cabin. She just starts firing, and he can't see what's going on. It just seems like to him she's firing at nothing. But what he does see is the bottom portion of the garage get burst open, and he's running around trying to find a way to get in. The entity, though, appears as form of this child who's scrambling through the door, she manages to get around him and out and into her car. And she speeds off, leaving everyone there. But she ends up wrecking her car into a cornfield and waking up in a hospital with a broken arm, probably a concussion, and makes the decision that she's going to pass it off to Greg. Obviously, he knows the deal, he knows the score, and he takes it. 4 days go by, nothing's showed up for him yet, and he's still not believing it, despite what everyone is telling him and what he saw at the garage door. But that night, the entity does arrive. She sees it and tries to save him, but there's no saving him. He's gone. And now the entity is back after her. And she runs off to her friend's house and is hiding there. And Paulie arrives, and he starts questioning her like, well, why didn't you give it to me? Because why? What? Me? Think of me in this situation when you're the one in threat. And he tries to kiss her, and she pushes him off. But she does have an idea. He's not completely useless. They decide they're going to go to the pole, and they set up all these electronics. She gets into the pole, and they wait. And the entity does arrive that night. But the entity isn't stupid as Hugh told them. And instead of going into the pole to be electrocuted, he starts just chucking the appliances at her. Now, they're getting ripped out of the wall, so she's not being electrocuted, but she is getting meleeed in the head by everything. For some reason, they thought it was a good idea to give Paulie the gun, who is shooting the air because he can't see it. And she's pointing at it, but he still can't tell where he is. So he clearly shoots Laura in the leg because he's an idiot who can't see forward. So the sister comes up with the idea of throwing a blanket over his head and then shooting where the blanket is. And it gets dumped into the water. He makes one last play to grab her before she can get out. Paul, once again, showing the intelligence by just firing at her in the pole. The fourth or fifth shot finally does shoot him in the head. And she sees just a pool of blood. And when it's all over, they go back home. She sleeps with Paul. So if this isn't over, now he has it too. And the movie closes out with those two holding hands, walking in the uncertainty of never knowing if it's out there still or not. And that's It Follows. Let's start with the pros, shall we? I think this is a wonderfully shot movie. It's got some gorgeous shots, gorgeous camera work, well lit. The actors and actresses in this movie, kick ass. Micah Monroe, who plays Jay, excellent work. She had great chemistry with Lily Sepe and Jake Reary, her sister, and Hugh together. And although I'm not too sure that I'm supposed to dislike Keir Gilchrist's Paulie, Keir Gilchrist Paulie, that is my takeaway. I largely don't like him. We'll get into a little bit. Okay. Now we got to get into the elevated parts of this movie, because elevated horror is supposed to be high art, but doesn't rely on a lot of the trends of regular horror and makes you think. And since I've watched this movie, I've watched a lot of people's interpretation of this movie, and the director really isn't helping anything. He doesn't really want to answer too many questions, but it does seem from his perspective it's supposed to be the death of innocence. You know, the gradual acceptance from youth to adulthood and the dreariness of just waiting for death and just trying to find any happiness to cling on to. I know, I have one. The problem is like, see, this movie feels like a nihilist dream, and it should be like, oh, this is right down my aisle. Well, I'm a miserable prick too, but it's not. And I think it's because like the happiness she finds, I guess you could say, is with Paul, who's an ass, just a serious, straight up ass. And I get it. Oh, he's a nice guy. He loves her. Look at everything he's done for her. You take that argument and apply it to Yara, and at least Yara seems to accept no, which is something Paul gets all throughout this movie. It's like they even don't trust him to be at her house at the beginning because they don't trust him to leave her alone, which he doesn't do. That he got jealous over Greg, despite the fact she even explained, like, oh, me and Greg slept with each other already. That's one of the other things. It's like that loss of innocence by having sex and discovering that side of things. But that can't be true either because she wasn't a virgin in this movie. She had had sex before, like I just said with Greg. So that's off the table too. And to me, it just never feels like it's as smart as this movie thinks it is. And like the little things like the death of youth into adulthood, that is a matter of perception into itself. Some people can take that jump from youth to adulthood with great strides and continuously be happy. And you just find things you enjoy and love, kind of like this guy here, what I'm doing here. And you can just accept that you're miserable and waiting to die, sure, but you don't have to. You can find a lot of things to be happy about. And this movie seems to take the approach of just be miserable all the time, blah, blah, blah. And none of it really works for me. I get what they're saying, it just doesn't work for me. But I'm not going to beat that movie, I'm not going to beat it up over that. Because like I said, this elevated horror has never really been my bag too much. So I'm not going to browbeat it and take the grade away from it. Because I can see why a lot of people do really enjoy this movie. And why they have a lot of love for it. So my final grade will be a generous one. I'll give it a B-. That seems fair. It is a solid, good movie grade that people enjoy. I could see those aspects of people enjoy it. It just doesn't cut it for me. And that's it from me. Like I said at the beginning, if you would like a movie for me to review, leave it in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this one. Mandy will be coming soon. Bye-bye.